Hello, friends. It's good to be with you. It's good to have this event happening. My name is Pablo Suarez. There was a time when I was a full-time researcher on climate and disasters. And then about 15 years ago, I became a humanitarian worker. It was pretty clear already at the time that there's so much knowledge we have about what may happen, and that knowledge can be used by people to save themselves and save their loved ones. And we can save each other if we love each other. Whether it's tomorrow's hurricane or long-term sea level rise, there are things we know about what's coming, and there are things we can do. But it turns out we are not doing enough. I don't know how you feel, but I am really concerned, as are many others, that there is a lot of darkness in the horizon. The goal of today is to help us explore how we can try to not only transition from darkness to illumination, but to harness the energy that is latent in these very dark skies, metaphorical and otherwise, to enable us to pursue resilience, not just despite the sea of warnings, but because of it. This is a photo from the day when I arrived to the UN climate conference in Paris. Many of you may remember that COP. It was filled with promise of the chances of a global agreement to help us all deal with the problem of our changing climate. But when I saw this, imagine that arrival, the sky was so ominous and the registration building was the source of light. We were going there. And this is the choice we confront. Are we going to be on the ominous side or on the luminous side? We know that darkness is around us. We cannot just turn darkness off. What we can try to do is to turn illumination on. So what is going on? This is one of many results from scientific work. In this case, a heat or temperature depiction of the recent heat wave in Europe this year.
Pablo?
Yes.
Just one technical thing. It's still on the slide that shows your entire screen. If you maybe click present mode again and make sure you're sharing. I am grateful
to you for that. When I see my screen, I see the heat map. So let's
you may need to reshare the screen. If you press the share screen button, you can select the out.
Okay, let me do the stop share.
So if you're in
and
full
the
screen.
Share again. Thanks for the warning, Peter. There we are. Can you see the PowerPoint now?
It's still in the edit mode, but when you click the share screen, so an option to select the
view
that way
and present. Let's hope this does the trick.
No, it didn't.
I think you can reshare your screen now. Now you've put the PowerPoint up, because then you can select the full screen output as your share screen, if you know what I mean.
Friends, as you're witnessing, thanks for your patience. Let me go into this technological moment again.
So when you click the share screen, you should get options of which window you want to choose.
Yes, I thought I had done that, but obviously I haven't. Here's, oh, let's try this. So what I can do is to first share, put this into view full screen, and no, oh boy, technology, present, trying again, share screen. There we go. That looks better. Let's see.
Yes.
Am I advancing now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good job.
Oh,
thank you.
Thanks for the warning, Peter. You see, a warning can be an act of caring. This was a heat wave map for Europe. It was depicting the present state, and we knew it was getting worse. Extreme temperatures can be killers. Heat waves are silent killers. Now, a French meteorologist, when looking at the anomalies in extreme temperatures in his region, he found this. That is just nature speaking, but he saw in this map a screaming face, which made him remember The Scream by Edvard Munch. If you're a scientist, if you're an activist, if you're a humanitarian, if you are a custodian of ecosystems, if you're a young person who wants to have a future, anyone who is both informed and caring has no choice but to be confronting this feeling from time to time. And we need to know what to do about it. How are we going to manage that? Unfortunately, a lot of what goes on is depicted in this cartoon. Given the climate crisis, burying our heads, it can look like a temporary solution, but things will continue to change. So what are we talking about? Climate grief, depression, anxiety, mourning. We know what is coming, and that can lead to many things, including paralysis, demotivation, a genuine feeling of emotional suffering. And this is important because the very people who should be motivated to do things, those who produce and communicate knowledge, the journalists, there's so much concern. What we need, what we want. Now what we can, we should, we must, we will help alleviate human suffering, promote well-being. All folks, whether it's in the front lines of where disasters happen, or those who have a mandate and a desire to help. The goal of our collaboration, which is an unusual collaboration, someone from Google, someone from the Red Cross, someone from the BMW Foundation, we want to anticipate, we want to diagnose, we want to provide proper support. Harnessing that power of darkness. So allow me to invite my dear colleague and friend and increasingly brother, Peter Jin Hong. Peter can tell you about his unusual line of work and partners, and he's going to bring us into how the brain works and what we can do with it. Peter, I'm going to stop sharing and over to you.
Thank you, my brother. Pablo and I, we are like brothers from a different mother. We were introduced last year by Jessica and another friend, Marjorie, from the BMW Foundation, and it was like two people across the room that connected, eyes sparkling over the word insula, which actually is a key word you'll find out in this presentation. So thank you for joining. Let me just dive into the presentation. And I will ask now, can everyone see this slide? Can everyone see this goofy slide of the very, yes. All right. So I was introduced, thank you. I'm on a very unconventional self-imposed sabbatical from Google. I left a year ago to support my wife, who is a nurse, on the front lines, as well as take care of my daughter. And it's been a profound year. But at the same time, I have not been able to keep still, and I've been working with Pablo, as well as the BMW Foundation, as well as advising for Google for Startups, Google Health, and Sidewalk Labs. So I can't get my hands out of Alphabet. But the reason I'm starting with this photo is this is my daughter. She's quite an inspiration to me. It's funny because I used to be a geneticist, and it's funny how my Korean genes and my wife's Scottish and Danish genes produce this Japanese anime character. And it's really bizarre. The reason also why I start with this image is that it's a brain hack, and a number of things that I do is very inspired by who we are, why we do the things that we do, and the mechanics of it. And so while at Google, some of the pivotal research that I was fortunate to participate in and lead were around things like job search, which sounds very reasonable. But job search is more than a logistical spreadsheet of all the job listings. And certainly that's valuable to coalesce all of that data. But in our research, we found that human beings, when looking for jobs, it's a very human trait to feel a sense of shame and a sense of anxiety and depression. And that debilitates that person's ability to hang on and keep applying for work. And we used to see in our logs people disappearing on this course of job searching. And we couldn't explain it until we got these diaries from people, video diaries, saying how ashamed they felt that they couldn't even tell their husbands or wives or families or partners. They would do it from the darkness of their bedrooms or the corners of garages, make these confessions and admissions. And what we also saw through this behavior was people who paid more attention to even the depression they were going through and the anxiety they were feeling, even the act of writing these diary journals and recording them, actually helped them be more aware of who they are and actually helped them gain a little bit more grit and resilience. And the best survival strategies came out of grit and resilience. So this was fascinating because it explained a hole in the data. And what we lacked before was more holistic aspects of understanding humanity and why we do the things we do, or why we don't do the things that we logically predict we should be doing. Another dimension was user trust and privacy. And my daughter is a great example of resilience as well as user trust, because she would look like this and she would go lick, and I say no, and then she would lick me anyway, and yet I come back for more. So trust is a fascinating thing. Even when we're betrayed, what are the conditions that make us go back, right? On the aspect of resilience, in this pandemic, we keep getting packages in the mail, and they're not for her because they're just house supplies. But she always asks for the box. She goes, "Aw, but may I have the box?" And then when we give her the box, she fills it with her stuffed toys, runs outside, rings the doorbell, and goes, "I think there's a package. We should check the door." And like we bring the box in that she's filled with toys, and she gets to open it. But in the act of opening it, she's rewriting the narrative in her brain of what that experience was. And that is a profound example of resilience, because I know in human nature, if we don't end with a negative experience, if we rewrite that memory and hold on to the quintessential part that was really relevant, and for her, the part that was relevant was the act of opening and seeing toys. And so it's in a very profound way, she's distilled what she needed to do. When Pablo and I were talking about this aspect of human behavior, I wanted to try and apply it to what Pablo was passionate about in terms of climate crisis and climate grief. And it's really interesting that International Red Cross and Red Crescent are recognizing grief as a key factor, because just like job search, when people are under intense stress and anxiety, we fall into depression and we're in a state of grief. What I find interesting is we call it a state of grief as if it's a sentence, versus understanding that grief has always been a journey. Grief is a process. In fact, it's a process of healing. And we may have heard this many stages of grief, whether they're like the 5 stages, the 8 stages, or 12 stages. Regardless, they're stages in a journey. And the ultimate goal of that journey of grieving is to actually help you heal. And so if we see the statement climate grief, we're actually seeing the statement the climate path to healing, a climate process of healing. So in order to understand that process, we have to understand there are dimensions of it. And so we hear of denial and anger, bargaining, but ultimately the most important sort of stage to recognize is called acceptance. And when you get to that point of acceptance and grief, that's the part where you've dealt through your denial, dealt through your anger. It doesn't mean they're not going to come back, but it gives your brain, and it gives your body, it gives your psychology a little more grit and resilience to move on. In last December at COP25, Pablo invited me to talk about these dimensions and sort of the behavioral insights around resilience. And one example I used was actually, because it was Madrid, I tried to translate a bit into Spanish, but I called everyone pendejo. And in Spanish, that's not a nice word, but I basically made the admission that I am an asshole. And Pablo, you're an asshole, probably. In fact, many of us are assholes simply by the fact that we're privileged. And it turns out when you are in a position of privilege and power, it counters your ability to be empathetic, almost to the point where you can predict it. In fact, Paul Piff is a neuroscientist and researcher. He's now at Greater Good in Berkeley, and he enlightened me with some of his research along with his colleagues. And he had a game of Monopoly that was rigged, and whichever students were winning the game suddenly had laid back in their chairs, started talking more loudly, their body language was more aggressive, they would trash talk the other players. But because the game was rigged, when they actually allowed those players to start losing, what happened was, again, there was a flip of their behavior. They became more concerned about the welfare of, and performance of other players. They empathized with their situation. They became more humble. And so literally, power and privilege kind of influences our behavioral wiring to be a bit of an asshole. But what I'm trying to say is, it's not our fault. And the amazing thing is, if that's our biology, if we're pre-wired to be a little bit more aggressive and a bit more of apathetic asshole when we have more privilege and power, that's something we can overcome with conscientiousness. So we don't have to become a slave to our biology, but we can certainly become an ally to understanding why we do that. When we're in a position of power, we have more resources that we can actually be in position to share. And so being mindful of it allows us to hack our outcome. Hey, if there was a cage match between these two people, who would win? And it's a trick question because it depends on the muscles you use. And we all seem to celebrate the physicality and the visible, but when things are invisible, it's definitely harder. Turns out there is a muscle or muscle-like experience in the brain, and it's a region called the ACC and the insula. And in fact, if you took your finger and you pressed where that circle was and tickled, you'd actually tickle your compassion muscle, and that's the insula. What's fascinating is this insula and ACC, which you see lit up here, is positioned right between the prefrontal cortex, which we associate with all our logical, rational experiences, and then our amygdala, which we sometimes call the lizard brain, and is responsible for our emotional behaviors. In fact, if this region of the brain is damaged, you actually see behaviors like sociopathy, apathy, dementia. So your ability to remember, your ability to get along with your fellow human being, your ability to listen more and care more is essentially damaged. The other thing that damages this region is the excess of dopamine that we have in terms of our society constantly stimulating it through doom scrolling, through news, through every email notification. The demands are taxing, and so we increase the amount of anxiety in our beings, and that cortisol actually has a deleterious effect on this region, as well as dopamine overstimulation. So you have a cocktail of dopamine and cortisol that's actually damaging this part of your brain. You're actually becoming brain damaged. We are, in a way, artificially facilitating a pollution of sorts of dopamine and cortisol. And while we talk about climate change, we also need to be aware that we need to be conscientious of the fact that we have an innate ability to really communicate more and listen better if we take care of ourselves. One way to actually counter all the dopamine stimulation is actually another neurotransmitter called GABA. And this actually is a brain scan of a woman who's been writing a gratitude journal. And it literally lights up the area where GABA helps regulate and downregulate dopamine and helps downregulate cortisol in the amygdala. So I want to take you through an exercise that we do that allows this kind of behavior shifting to happen. I also want to bring to light the fact that as human beings, we may have all these behaviors sometimes we are angry about or feel guilty about, but it's just like this idea of being a pendejo. A lot of it is just biological wiring. But the biological wiring is also something that we can really be enlightened by. So I want to share this with you. So I'm sure a lot of us have something to complain about and gripe about. So if everyone could either write down or just think about one thing that they want to complain about. For example, I have to pay the mortgage on this house. I have to now drive my daughter an extra 10 kilometers to get to school in this pandemic. I have to pay these bills. I have to. So if everyone has one of those, now I want to ask you to just cross out the word have and replace the word have with get. So I get to. And in that very same statement, I get to pay this mortgage that shelters the loves of my life, my wife, my daughter. I get to have a house that we love. I get to drive my daughter 10 kilometers to a new school, but it keeps her safer because it's a forest school and she's outside all day learning about poisonous plants versus medicinal plants, learning how to use a knife, learning how to build a shelter when there's a winter snow blizzard outside. I get to. And so the reality is, it's okay to complain. It's a very human trait to complain. But ages ago, we had more time for reflection. And complaining, again, is a part of a process. The process continues to then appreciating what it is that you're complaining about and seeing it in a fuller and more holistic light. I get to. So if any of you had those I have to statements and switched to I get to and found out what was actually beautiful about that pain that you're going through, your brains just lit up in all the right ways. Ultimately, I just want to share this one universal truth with you. I don't know if you know this, but this is the Andromeda Galaxy, and it's on a collision course with our galaxy, the Milky Way. So if you thought that in a way we would live forever, we're not. We're going to die. So Pablo, you're going to die. We're all going to die. I'm going to die. Everyone on this call is going to die. We're all going to die. And it's a funny thing to say out loud, but as human beings, we also do desperate and irrational things when it comes to our survivability. But it's that desperation that sometimes doesn't allow us to catch our breath and see the beauty in things. And grief and anxiety are very uncomfortable things. But if we can sit with them, we can give our bodies also a chance to do what it does naturally, which is to heal and look at what we can appreciate and be grateful for. And that gratitude actually builds resilience that helps us be healthier, that helps us be more empathetic, that helps us listen to our neighbors and take care of each other. And so that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Hi, Pablo. Can I get the pictures up on? And thank Peter. That was wonderful. Wonderful. You should have been here in the class today when we work with sexuology, because we also rewrite the script for people who have been abused. That's what we also train them to do, train the students to do. Oh, it's
Absolutely.
Pablo now. Sorry, I will shut up.
Okay, it was you. Yeah, I am getting.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is really great. I'm Mia Susanna Kasha. I'm from the Reference Center for Psychosocial Support from the Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies. And I'm just briefly going to take you through the principles that we use of early humanitarian interventions in any crisis setting. It's to prevent mass trauma. And before we launch into the principles, let me just say that you can apply these principles to your workplace, you can apply them to the family, you can apply them in all kinds of situations because it really makes sense. And the 5 principles that we're working with, they are safety, calming, I'm going to talk a bit about them, self and collective efficacy, connectedness, and hope. So for the safety, that's number 1. It's difficult to feel good, like we just talked about. It's difficult to feel grateful if you're not safe. But safety has 2 aspects. It is both the objective and the subjective safety. So the first thing we do, whether it is intervening in a group, whether it is going out in a crisis setting, is to establish safe spaces. We need to set them up, and we especially do it for children. So we create these child-friendly or safe spaces for children. But it goes a bit beyond that as well. The next principle is calming, which is also related to the stresses that we just talked about. So calming is not only knowing how to calm others, calma, calma, don't get excited. It's more about knowing how you yourself can regulate your emotions. So it's about emotional literacy. It is about life skills. It's about your personal life skills. What can I do when I get all excited? So one thing, I was just giving a presentation to the field hospitals going out and to Honduras, and people are in the hospital setting, they're safe, but they're all wound up and they are too excited. So what can you do? You just give the patient, if it's an adult, you can give them chewing gum. So I'd like you to invite you to chew. I'm going to invite you to chew with me. Imagine you're chewing gum. And just go on, and you will notice that when you're chewing, you have the saliva in your mouth, and having the saliva is the opposite, sends the opposite signals than being afraid, because when you are worried and anxious, you will have a dry mouth. So I use this technique when I go to the dentist, but you can also use it with patients. With children, we actually use soap bubbles, so to get the same effect, because then we get to the deep breathing. The self and collective efficacy is something we're going to see a picture of in a little while. And this is about creating possibilities for people themselves to start going. And a favorite example of mine is also you're going to see a picture from Pakistan. I'm going to give you another example from Pakistan after the floods 2010, when I was in Sindh and also in Swat Valley. There was so many communities. We would come out, people would say, madam, could you please build us a school? We don't have a school. Meaning I should then come and do things, not because it was stupid, not because they were greedy, but more the thought did not occur to them. And I would sit with them and say, so in this community, do you have a building that works? Yes, madam, we have the mosque. Right. Do you still have a teacher? Yes, the 2 teachers still here. So it's about helping people back on their feet, and you can have a list of things that you can discuss. Next principles is connectedness. And number one thing that affects all of us in any emergency is, where are our loved ones? That's number one. We don't stand and wait for the Red Cross to come with the packages. We want to grab the phone and call our loved ones. So what we do also in the Red Cross and Red Crescent is a lot about restoring family links, because that is the most challenging thing for people, because it leads to the grief that Peter talked about. And Peter, by the way, that model with the stages is quite old-fashioned. So then we go to promoting hope. So in fact, all these principles and learning how to change what you are seeing as negative to the positive, and for the supporter to comment on things that is good, and also to bring out the gratitude, is quite efficient. Before we go on to the picture, I'd just like to say that at this moment in the pandemic, what we do know is that the level of anxiety is going up, the level of depression is going up. Surprisingly enough, and unusual for other situations, is that it's going up, especially in youth. And one of the reasons is, as Peter rightly points out, is their propensity to be glued to their phones. And this, when they look at things that are not very positive, there's this tendency that more things will come up. So that's actually identified as one of the things that's bringing out. But the worrying thing is, anxiety is up by 7-fold as what it was in, and this is across many countries, what it was in 2017. And what we do know is that it will rise even further after the pandemic. So what we do in psychosocial support is we're actually working with the principles that Peter are talking about in our psychological first aid that we offer to people, how we can support and promote resilience. So the final one, please. Thank you. So this is a wonderful picture from the earthquake in Pakistan. The huge earthquake that happened 2005, if I remember correctly. And what you see is that in the midst of all the rubble, in the midst of everything being collapsed, people start to rebuild their lives. So as long as we can go out and we can support this, we will have well-functioning communities springing back. And in order to do that, we need the emotional literacy, because the emotional literacy And the psychoeducation is needed to know that what is happening is not, I'm not crazy, I'm not going insane. This is a normal reaction that I'm having to a very, very abnormal or unusual situation. So I think that was my 5 moments. So I will leave you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ia, for joining us. And if you don't mind my sharing, we were prepared for a session without Ia because she was going through what too many people are going through with the pandemic, and she got herself up and she's with us, and she brought to you so much skill and talent, you know, providing psychosocial support in the aftermath of earthquakes, in war zones and so on. It really takes an amazing amount of generosity. Yeah, we're so grateful to you for joining forces with us.
And the single most important factor after any crisis, big or small, that's social support.
Exactly. So what we want to do now is to bring us, as participants in this session, into a place deep within that can help us see differently. This is going to be unusual. You may have been forewarned in the description of this session. Let's start with a phenomenon called pareidolia. Have you ever looked up to the sky? I used to do it when I was bored in high school, looking out the window and looking at those clouds, and maybe you see a face. That is a well-documented phenomenon called pareidolia, which is noticing faces even when there isn't a face. Our brains are wired to detect the face of a predator, detect the face of an enemy, detect the face of someone in need, so that we know, oh, there's a creature there. I need to establish a connection, run away or run to. Now, sometimes we go, overdrive, and we see faces where there's just clouds. We are going to tap on that superpower of the brain in this session with you. This is a satellite image of Easter Island. In the southern coast, you see a crater from long ago, some volcanic eruption, some unusual shape in the coastline. Do you see a face there? Let me zoom in. If you imagine that crater as an ear, the peninsula on the right as a nose, maybe there's a chin there, maybe there's a face. Do you see that? Now, if you rotate your head one direction or the other, 90 degrees, you may be able to see a very different face. It's the same place, but now it looks much more childlike, with a rounded nose, with a very gentle expression, old person looking into the new generation. This happens all over. No matter what image we present to you, if there's enough texture, you will eventually, with patience and perseverance, discover a face, and maybe that face will talk to you. So what we're going to do now is to offer you to go face it. Go find faces and imagine those faces talking to you. And imagine your own reaction, confronting, facing what comes from what you see. We're very fortunate that we have Daniel Stevens with us, who has created this tool with support from BMW Foundation. Very shortly, we will give you a web address where you will open a link. You will enter a code. It's not the one in the PowerPoint. We just have to change it. Daniel will explain later. You will look into the images, some from the brain, some from galaxies, some from satellite images, and you will see faces, hopefully, or entities or something that speaks to you, and you will express in text what emerges as a caption. Can you connect it to darkness, to illumination, to a way forward? This is what it will look like once you have entered that space. You will see a circle with some kind of image, some kind of textured image. Some have higher resolution than others. You can zoom in and out by moving the sliders. You can rotate the image. You can pan the image. On the bottom left is where you can write things that come to your mind that others will be able to read. No one will know who wrote what. So you can be as expressive as you want.
And
then
Pablo, you may just want to point out that if you click on the image, you can move it around the screen.
Thank you. So you can zoom in and out, you can rotate right and left, and you can pan up and down or whichever way until you find, you're going to be an artist. You're going to be creating images out of images that exist. Thank you, Daniel, for that. And then if you click next, you can find another image that will be your ingredient for seeing and doing. Then we will move forward. You will see the creations of others. You will be presented with 3. And maybe you like all of them, in which case you can click on all 3, or you like none of them, in which case you just move to next, or you click 1 or 2 that you like. In this case, this person liked the one with the dog. And then after you have selected any that you like and you click next, you will see some more. And eventually we will get to see a show of the ones that were the most resonant. So you are going to go there. Again, the event code is not that one. My apologies, I should have changed it. Daniel, would you like to write in the chat both the address where people should go to and the event code? And if you go to the chat, you can see ce.goodfocus.net. The event code is UR8. Go in there, start looking, start moving your head, rotating the image, zooming in and out. and we'll invite you to enjoy, take the time you need, resonate, and remember to express the 1, 2, or 3 or 0 that resonate with you, so that we help to bubble up the most resonance. Liking is already underway. If you haven't seen a change, you may need to refresh your browser. And you have more than 40 images to react to.
A technical tip as well. As you're selecting images, you might need to scroll up to see the Submit Selection button so that you can move on to the next set of selections.
Thank you, Peter. And let's give you about a minute or less to finish viewing, and then we will move on to the next phase. And Peter, I would invite you to guide participants through the post-activity reflection. Maybe you want to share something that you notice, something that emerges. I will go silent, and I hereby express my deep gratitude to all of you for being part of this. Thank you.
Pablo, I wanted you to record bedtime stories for my daughter. It's so relaxing. It's interesting, the selections of images and the captions, because all of you out there, thank you for being open and vulnerable. What I find so inspiring about some of the captions is they allow your inner poetry to come out, your inner fears, your inner child. We speak about the cosmos, we speak about our relationships, we speak about our fears. It's kind of amazing what people see in the patterns around us. I also see statements of great hope and resilience, speaking to a lot of themes on reconnection, a lot of themes that the life and universe is bigger than us, but that it doesn't mean that it absolves us from responsibility. They're quite profound. Thank you for sharing these. I also love that some people are bringing out their inner child. There are ones that are just delightful and funny because they have like completely shirked that seriousness that we so are overwhelmed by. And that aspect of play, that aspect of exploring the different parts of you, and no one can dictate what parts to explore. Everyone has a different way of experiencing things. Much like Aya said, even what we understand about grief has been evolving. Everyone's experience is unique. Stages are prescriptive. Boundaries are prescriptive. And so along with this, you're extending your boundaries beyond perhaps the normal work that you do and allowing yourself to reconnect with yourself. So thank you for doing that. And on the brain side, this aspect of play, It helps regulate a lot of the neurotransmitters, helps down-regulate cortisol, helps see stress as, again, a part of a journey and ultimately an ally.
Peter, I
And
just
this
wanted to interrupt
exercise,
to let everyone know that we've begun the slideshow so people can see some of the images that were most liked.
thank you, Daniel. So if you refresh your browser, you'll see some of the images and captions that have surfaced through all the contributions. Again, you may need to scroll up if you just see the image. The captions may be below the viewable area of the screen. I'll read them aloud just in case people don't see the captions. An astronaut dancing on the moon. Sirius watching the sunrise. Being and feeling close to you is the most important thing in my life. Going up.
And that was the last image.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone. We also have a special request to share the title of the music. So if our host can also type that in the chat, that would be wonderful.
This is appropriately ambient music from Brian Eno, who is very well known for his work reimagining the role of music and inspiration, including, for example, through the Long Now Foundation. We think of now as the time that ends imminently in the snap of a fire cell. But if you think of now as a long now, as extending into our lifetimes and beyond, how different our decisions would be, how beautiful our relationships would be. Friends, we are so grateful to all of you for all that has emerged, for all that's happening. Peter and Ia, you have been so kind in coexisting with my all over the place brain scattering. This is my 9th understanding risk session. I have designed and facilitated 8 of them. I was up at 4 a.m. and then 7 a.m. and 10 to midnight last night. So again, my apologies for the glitches. You know, the brain can get tired, but I have to say I have this glow. Just that last image going up with the negative space, the arrow behind those fired brain cells. Such a powerful way to end. We want to express our deep gratitude, not only to the organizations that brought us Ia, Akasha, you know, the IFRC, the Red Cross global family, doing so much, and now in the Red Cross, Red Crescent's strategy for the future, climate and mental health, and 2 of the priorities, but they are being treated as separate priorities. How can we recognize that they are part of a oneness that needs to be part of what we do? Peter, your work bringing empathy and caring to algorithms that help us find jobs and more. So grateful. Daniel, you've made magic happen. You've expressed us all, allowed us to express. BMW Foundation, Jessica, who couldn't join us, sends her regards. And of course, the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center and the Understanding Risk community for making this space possible. Thank you, friends. Onwards, there's more.